Welcome back, Hnrs. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to our, where we are doing the beginnings of Rome, right? So what you need to do right now in your notes, right? We finished up our last class talking about the Hellenistic period. We talked about Alexandria, Egypt, the Library of Alexandria, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. We talked about how literally the Hellenistic period is going to be a period of great growth. Math is going to increase. Science is going to increase. Art is going to increase. And also, there are going to be female leaders of the Hellenistic Empire as well, because that just demonstrates how prosperous the era was after the fall of Alexander the Great. Well, not the fall of Alexander the Great, the death of Alexander the Great, to his mysterious fever. Now, the big thing about it, though, is during this entire time, during this entire moment, during the era of the Greeks, there was a new city that was small, but was growing very, very quickly. And that city was known as the city of Rome, right? And I love talking about ancient Rome. It's my absolute favorite thing to teach about, right? So I cannot wait to start this journey with you. And do me a favor. In your notes, just put in big, 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 bold letters, Rome, right? All capital letters. We are now starting off the kingdom that is known as Rome. And we will talk about later how later on we won't even say just Rome. We'll actually use 4 other letters, S, P, Q, R, to actually signify Rome. But before we can go any further, we have to spend all of, if not most of this flip, talking about a very, very important concept. Where Rome is, the geography of the area around it, and why it's going to lead to such a very, very interesting, different kind of civilization than the Greeks. Because nothing makes Mr. Terry more upset than when people are like, aren't Greece and Rome like the same thing? No, they're not, all right? So, they are not the same thing. They have very similar cultures, but they're not the same, all right? So just like you wouldn't say Athens and Sparta are the same. Now, the big thing about it, though, getting into it, is we have to start off by talking about where Rome is, right? So let's chat about that real quick. Rome is located in the modern-day country of Italy, right? I have been there several times. I absolutely love it. I love going to Rome. I like other cities in Italy better, but Rome is pretty fun, right? So the big thing about it, though, is Rome is actually located in the middle area of Italy, right down here, in an area known as, what is that, I think it's Lazio, that is actually the county it's inside of. Now, the big thing about it, though, in general, is Italian geography is going to dramatically affect the growth of Rome. Now, there's a big reason why we talk about Italian geography and not the geography of Rome, right? Due to the fact that when we look at Rome, there is going to be a point in their history where they are not just a city anymore, where they're actually an empire that takes up all of this area over here, right? And then they get even bigger than that at one point, and they end up taking over even more stuff. Whenever they actually take over at the height of their empire, they own all of this, everything in red. And Rome was just one little city right here, but they controlled everything in red by the peak of their empire under this guy named Trajan, right? So the thing that you need to understand is that we can't say the geography of Rome, because if you say the geography of Rome, you're talking about what Rome, which Rome, where Rome, that Rome, this Rome, over there Rome? No. We're talking about Italian geography first, right? So because that is where Rome is based. As you can tell, we have to already go ahead and do this a little bit differently because it's already becoming different than Greece, right? When you talk about the geography of different areas of Greece, you're basically just talking about where was Athens, where was Sparta, where was this, where was that. How'd that affect them? Geographic isolation, blah, 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 blah. So the thing about it with Italian geography is first and foremost, Italy, a little bit different shape than Greece, right? First and foremost, Italy is a larger in square mileage than Greece is. However, something that you probably don't understand is that both of these countries in the modern era are not that big, right? So Italy is only about 100 miles wide and about 700 miles long. Theoretically speaking, if you wanted to, you could travel the entirety of Italy in a couple of weeks, right? You could go see all the major cities in a few weeks because Italy, square mileage-wise, is only about the size of Louisiana and Arkansas, right? About 100 miles wide, 700 miles long. To give you some kind of perspective, 100 miles would only take you about an hour and, if you were driving 60 miles an hour, about an hour and 20 minutes. No, wait, not 60 miles. An hour and 40 minutes to drive from, Yes, an hour and 40 minutes to drive from the east coast of Italy to the west coast of Italy. That's not that long. That's actually, I think Lake Charles is, further away than that, right? So the thing about it, though, is it's very, very narrow and very, very long, okay? So also what you need to know is that the land in Italy, speaking of traveling over it, is a lot less rugged than ancient Greece, right? As we already know, ancient Greece was covered in mountains, right? And this is going to lead to the development of city-states having very uniquely different cultures from one another, okay? For example, Athens and Sparta are not the same, right? They're very different culturally speaking. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that when they were founded during the Dark Ages period, they were settled. They were separated by large areas of mountains. And that's going to lead to their cultures developing independently from each other and being very different. This is Sparta. It's so important that we always remember that.
This is Sparta!
Exactly, right? And Rome is going to be very different from both of those places, right? But if you had to say which one they were more like, interesting enough, it's kind of like a mixture of the two, right? So the thing about it, though, is that the land in Italy is much less rugged than ancient Greece. It's got a lot more hills and stuff like that, but you can travel the entirety of Italy pretty easily by land. Now, there are also, though, another major difference between Greece and Italy, right? The biggest difference between Greece and Italy is the fact that Greece had tons of natural harbors everywhere. Let's talk really quickly about what a natural harbor is, right? A natural harbor is this concept of basically like, oh, there's a beach, I can pull my boat up to it, I can hop off my boat, I can go onto the land, I can trade with some people, I can bring my stuff back to my boat, right? It's very easy to pull a boat up against to or get very, very close to, right? But the thing about it is, Italy doesn't have many natural harbors, right? Mostly due to its coastline. The coastline of Italy is very, very rocky, right? So if we look at the coastline of Italy, we're going to look up a picture of this real quick so you can actually see it. The coastline of Italy is actually sheer cliffs that kind of fall straight down into the Mediterranean, as you can see, right? Very, very aggressive cliffs that kind of just cascade down into the actual Mediterranean, which is going to make it so it's very, very difficult for them to trade by sea when they're earliestly being founded, right? This right here is called Cinque Terre. My wife and I have been there. My wife has actually hiked all the cities of Cinque Terre because she's awesome. Now, the thing about it, though, is as you can see, it's very beautiful, but interestingly enough as well, when we're thinking about ancient Rome, this is a big reason why Rome was hard to invade, right? It was very, very hard to invade because if boats pulled up, they would have to climb a mountain just to be able to get onto the coastline of Italy, right? So there is very, very few, if any, actual really good natural harbors on the edge of Italy. Now, there is a handful of them, but we'll talk about that whole thing in a second and why the Romans could never go settle that area. So trade was much, much easier on land, not so much by sea in ancient Rome, right? So going into it, though, as well, there were some natural harbors. Some of y'all probably might actually be watching this right and be like, well, I know that Italy also includes Sicily. And Sicily has a lot of natural harbors. And you're right. That's so smart, Haley Ruther. I'm proud that you know that. It's very, very impressive that you know that. But the thing that you don't realize, though, is that do you remember when we talked about this in ancient Greece? How the Greeks colonized a lot of stuff and things like that? Of course y'all remember that. I know Katie Morell back there is sitting there being like, yes, I do remember that, right? Well, the big thing about it, though, is the Greeks colonized so much land that they took up the only natural harbors that early Romans would have been able to use, and they colonized those areas of Sicily. So that's why the Romans had to settle all the way up here, because the Greeks had colonized and settled all the areas with natural harbors that they would have been able to even use, okay? But going into it, though, as well, you need to also understand, big other difference from ancient Greece is ancient Greece had terrible farmland, absolutely garbage farmland. The farmland in ancient Greece, or the farmable land in ancient Greece, is only about 20%, right? Only about 20% of ancient Greece is farmable, whatsoever. And as we already know as well, only a handful of things grew in ancient Greece, right? Things like grapes and grains and like olives as well. Well, in ancient Rome, their farming is going to be fantastic, right? Fantastic mostly due to the fact that there was a lot of two certain chemicals inside of their soil, right? So in Roman soil, where you could grow just about anything, wheats, grains, grapes, olives, whatever you could get your hands on would grow in ancient Rome. They had two substances inside it, a lot like ancient Egypt, that kept things growing so easily. So when we're looking at those two things, you have to understand what they are. One is volcanic ash, right? So something you need to understand is that Italy has a handful of volcanoes on it. Some of y'all are probably already immediately being like, hey, I know one of these volcanoes. Isn't one of them Mount Vesuvius? Well, yes, Mount Vesuvius is a very famous volcano that's inside of Italy. And for any of y'all that know anything about Italy and, of course, Italian history, you will know that there was a very famous Roman settlement called Pompeii that was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. For any of y'all that actually don't know what that is, we'll talk about it a little bit in class. We'll look at some of the lava-covered bodies and stuff like that from Pompeii, which is absolutely wild. But the thing about it is, though, is that is not actually the volcano that provided tons of volcanic ash to Rome. The volcano that actually provided a ton of volcanic ash to Rome was actually this thing called Mount Stromboli, which is a lot funnier to say. So getting into it, though, you have to understand that this volcanic ash is very important. Because if you've ever seen pictures of, like, Hawaii before, Hawaii is covered in greenery, covered in natural growth, covered in trees, covered in vines, covered in things that grow really, really well there. Because volcanic ash is full of natural chemicals like carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus as well that actually really, really helps plant growth. Another big thing that they have as well, though, is silt. Just like the ancient Egyptians, whenever their river would flood, silt would be deposited onto the banks of the river. Yay, silt's back. Now, so getting into it, though, as well, Italy is also protected, geographically speaking, by a handful of mountains that make it very, very difficult for outside invaders to show up. Now, one of them is the big mountain range that you need to know. The other one is one that goes north to south and kept early Rome protected, okay? So the big one you need to know that's up in the northern area, if we're looking at this map right here, there are mountains up here in the northern sector of Italy known as the Alps, right? The Alps are massive, and they're absolutely beautiful. And if you ever get a chance to fly over top of them, they look like this from the air. So they are a huge set of mountains that actually make it very, very difficult to traverse. And if it's very, very difficult to traverse, it means it's going to be very, very difficult to invade the ancient city of Rome, right? Now, one big guy is going to try to get all the way over these mountains with a bunch of elephants, but we'll talk about that guy a little bit later on. He's a dude by the name of Hannibal, right? Now, some of y'all probably already know who Hannibal it is, though, especially if you've been in Latin, right? So going forward as well, though, there is one other mountain range that's much smaller that runs north to south in Italy, and it's the Apennines, right? And they run right here. If you just now said Appalachian, you're wrong. Those are in North America. Get your life together, all right? Also, there's the Appalachian, not Lachin, Appalachian, because Appalachian is what y'all say, but North Carolina named them, so we take the credit, all right? So the big thing about it, though, going into it as well, Italy, its geography is very, very important, all right? So also, though, I don't know if you know this, but some of y'all probably have heard about the founding myth of Rome, right? So now what we've done, if we've set up appropriately what's going on in Italy, right? We know the geography of Greece. We know it's super mountainous, geographic isolation, terrible farmland, Aegean and Ionian Sea, right? If you need to know, the Mediterranean Sea and the Tyrrhenian Sea are the ones that actually border like Italy, if you want to write those down. The big thing about it, though, that now we're getting into is we also spent a lot of time when we were talking about ancient Greece. We talked about a lot of myths, and we also talked a lot of their early foundings, right? We talked about the Minoans. We talked about the Mycenaeans. We talked about their foundings. We talked about the Spartans. We talked about the Athenians. We talked about all that stuff. But Rome has a very, very famous story when it comes to their founding, right? And it all relates to these two brothers, right? These two brothers who are currently suckling a wolf right there, right? Well, the big thing about it is this symbol in Roman history is a very, very prominent and very, very important one. And the myth is about these two brothers down here. And their names are Romulus, R-O-M-U-L-U-S, and Remus, R-E-E-M-U-S. Romulus and Remus, according to story, are the two twin brothers that were born to a woman who would go on, or not, of course to a woman, who were born and would eventually go on to found the city of Rome, right? And Rome is named for Romulus because he was the very first king of Rome, right? And a lot of it is a very long story that I'll actually tell in class because I don't want you to have to sit here and listen to me about how a she-wolf named Lupa, L-U-P-A, a she-wolf named Lupa is going to save them from their death, and they would eventually go on to help their grandfather take back the city of Alba Longa and stuff like that. And Romulus and Remus would eventually strike out and go and found the city of Rome, and they would get into a fight, and Romulus would stab Remus to death and then proclaim himself the king of Rome. But I'll tell you the whole story in class. But the big things that you need to know for your notes is that Romulus, Remus, Lupa, saved by a wolf, eventually founds Rome. Oh, and another thing, you need to know how many hills Rome was settled on, right? It's on 7 of them, okay? But we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. But in the grand scheme of things, do we know already that there's more to this founding story than just Romulus and Remus? Well, of course there are, right? The chances are that we don't really know if Romulus and Remus ever truly existed. Now, we're pretty confident that Romulus existed, right? We're pretty confident because we actually have some of his old huts and stuff like that. We have one of his old huts that actually looked a lot like this, right? There is archaeological data on top of this place called Palatine Hill inside of Rome, where we believe that we have the ancient structure of Romulus's hut and stuff like that. But the thing about it, though, is looking at this hut, as we can tell, the Romans started off just as primitive as everybody else, right? They're going to go through a very early Neolithic period and stuff like that, where they're just going to start farming and having an early settlement and things like that. But the big group of people that actually founded Rome were these people known as the Latins, right? So the Latins were a group of people that traversed Italy and were looking for somewhere to settle. Now, how did these people affect the culture of Rome more than anything else? Their language, right? Latins spoke a language called Latin, right? And so, and Romans do not speak Roman, they speak Latin, right? And Latin is going to probably become the most important language in history, as far as Western history, going forward for the rest of this entire course. So you need to make sure that you know that, okay? The Latins are going to be those people that settle it. So Romulus, if he was anybody, he was a Latin that actually shot off and decided to actually found his own city. So they made these early structured homes, these little huts and stuff like that, in the areas near where modern-day Rome is today, on top of 7 different hills, and they were made out of wattle and daub, right? So basically, early Romans had just simple mud huts, and they were a very simple civilization, but they would grow to be the most important civilization probably in ancient Western history. Now, that's arguative, so we could get into a debate if Greece or Rome is more important, but these wattle and daub houses, we have some of the old structures left. Oh, also, fun fact, in the earliest phase of Rome as well, whenever you died, you would actually have your body burnt up and shoved inside of a little miniature version of your hut and stuff like that. It was like your urn. We actually have evidence that shows that you would literally have like a little baby version of your hut made, and then they would burn your body and shove it inside of it, and that's where they put your dead body. So going into it as well, though, a small group of them probably broke away from the Latins and founded what is now called the city of Rome. But the important thing about founding of the city of Rome is some little structures and things that are nearby it, right? So Rome was founded on one hill originally overlooking a place called Tiber River. The founding happened on, we believe, this place called Palatine Hill. Palatine. Palatine Hill. Palatine Hill is where the kings of Rome would also live because it was one of the tallest and it overlooked the river as well, right? And the Tiber, not the Tiger River, is going to become very, very important, all right? So the Tiber River is that same river that would flood every single year and deposit silt all over the lands that were at the base of these very, very famous hills and at the base of Palatine Hill where the original Roman settlement started. And that silt would be deposited and they would grow crops on the banks of said Tiber River, right? And also, there are other hills, though. This is my wife right here doing a handstand on Esquiline Hill when we actually went to go and visit Rome when we went in 2017. Look at how adorable she is. Look at that. Look at, oh, well, that's sideways, right? Look how, she's just very, very acrobatic and stuff like that. But the big thing about it, though, is the settlement grew to cover 7 hills to protect from floods. So as they grew, they knew they couldn't settle at the base of these hills because if they settled at the base, they would flood every now and again. So actually at the base of that hill, they put 2 very important things. A cemetery for anybody who wasn't cremated and put in their little hut, and also a trash pit. We actually have some old wattle and daub huts and stuff like that we have found down at the base of these hills in this middle area. But it's taken a lot of uncovering because another very famous site was actually built on top of these trash hills, right? So this right here is the earliest settlement of Rome, right? That is the 1st century BC Rome. This is the developed Rome. But as you can tell, we've got Quintilian, this hill, Servian Wall. We'll talk about all that stuff. Esquiline Hill, Celian Hill, Palatine Hill right here. And right there is where my wife did her little handstand right there. So the 7 hills of Rome are going to become very, very important, all right? But nearby, there were these people, okay? Up in the northern area, above the earliest settlement of Rome, right? When they were only covering a few of those hills. And as they were growing and looking to cover the 6th and 7th hill, there were these people to the north of them that are going to become very important to the culture of Rome. These people to the north of them are known as the Etruscans, right? So as you can already tell, if Italy has good geography, and if it has good soil, and if it has good farmland, and if it has good stuff that's going to keep it protected with these coastal cliffs and stuff like that, the Romans are not going to be the only ones that settle in this area. And another group of people that settle nearby them were these people known as the Etruscans, right? And the Etruscans are going to settle to the north of Rome, and for a short period of time, they're going to take Rome over, right? They created city-states in the northern area of Rome, and they are going to take over and occupy the city of Rome for a time, right? So they are going to trade with the Greeks, and they're going to share their culture, right? So something you need to understand is that the earliest history of ancient Rome, the Etruscans were larger than they were, right? They were larger, they were founded earlier, and the Etruscans were able to get pretty advanced pretty quickly because they traded with the Greeks, right? They actually went down to the Sicily, went down to the coastal areas of Italy, and they traded with some of the earliest Greeks that founded colonies in the southern area of Italy. And because the Etruscans are going to trade with the Greeks, that means that the Etruscans are going to pick up some things that are culturally Greek, right? So, that's why when we look at this ancient piece of art, this fresco, first of all, that was a Greek thing anyway. When we look at this fresco of the Etruscans, we can see the Etruscans standing next to olive trees that they learned to plant from the Greeks. We see laurel wreaths on their heads, just like the Greeks would wear at their Olympics. We see them playing Greek instruments and stuff like that, and all of this is just an example of what? Cultural diffusion. That's exactly right. I heard all of y'all say it at the exact same time. But the big thing that you need to know is that they are going to take over Rome from about, give or take, it's not 753. That actually isn't accurate. It's actually from about, give or take, 650 BC to about 509 BC, okay? They're going to build some of the original walls that go around the Roman settlement, and they're also going to rule over Rome and be the last 3 kings of the entire period, right? So something that you need to understand is that in Rome, there were 3 time periods, okay? Just 3. There's the kingdom period, the republic, and the empire. Kingdom, republic, empire. You can go ahead and jot that down now, but we are going to talk about it again later as well. Kingdom, republic, and empire. And Rome had 7 different kings. The last 3 of them were Etruscans, right? Because that was the time period that the Etruscans actually took them over, right? Our first one is Romulus. The last king of Rome was this guy named Tarquinius Superbus, who was actually an Etruscan man. And so with that, though, while the Etruscans ruled over them, the Etruscans are going to show Romans how to do certain things that are going to become culturally very Roman, but were originally related to the Greeks as well. So when we really look at this, take 2 seconds to think about that then. So technically, Roman culture is a mishmash of 3 other groups: Latin, Etruscan, and Greek, right? So the Romans are going to expel the Etruscans, though, and become their own state eventually in 509 BC when this happens. But even though they did that, a lot of things that we consider Roman are actually things that they picked up from the Etruscans. And we're going to write down 3 particular things that were culturally Etruscan that actually Romans are very well known for. And this is all 3 of them pictured in one little area. First and foremost, fashion, right? The toga, the thing that you know of as being very Roman, that was actually an Etruscan attire piece, right? And wealthy Romans would eventually start wearing them, and senators would wear them, and conquering Roman generals would wear them, right? Now, that's one big thing, the toga, that was, of course, Etruscan. Now, the Etruscans also learned the Greek alphabet, and they're going to learn that, and they're going to use it and teach it to the Romans as well. So the Greek alphabet is going to be a thing that the Romans are going to borrow from the Etruscans. They're going to change it, and the modern Latin alphabet is the one that we use now, right? And so then also this thing. Very important device, very important thing. And some of you are like, isn't that just an axe? It's more than just an axe, Caitlin Stremlau. It's a thing known as a fasces, right? So write that word down real quick. F-A-S-C-E-S. A fasces, right? So what a fasces is, it's a symbol of ruling power. Etruscan kings would carry these things around, right? They would carry them around, and it would symbolize their power. They didn't use it, and it wasn't a weapon, but the fasces was a symbol of power to the Etruscans, right? The Etruscans used this device to show how much authority their king had. And what it is an axe with wooden rods wrapped around the outside of it, trying to show the union of the government in the center and the people around it, right? The fasces is such an important sign of Roman government. It's such an important sign of Etruscan government. It's such an important sign of government, period, that we still use it in the modern era, right? And something that you probably don't even realize is that the fasces is used every day in the United States, right? And because we have actually a merging of Greek democracy and the Roman Republican government. We are those 2 things together, right? We are those 2 things, those 2 governments mushed together into one are literally that makes our democratic republic, right? And you can see it because there are 2 gold fasces on the back of the Senate Hall in Washington, D.C. if you look inside of the Senate chamber, right? Inside of the Senate chamber on that back wall are 2 massive gold fasces. Fasces that are wrapped inside of olive branches to demonstrate peace. And look at that. Ionic columns to demonstrate the government of the Greeks blended together with the government of the Romans, right? And there you go. And that's where we're going to stop this flip, right? Just showing you that there is some of this stuff that affects you on an everyday basis, but I'll see y'all when I see you again. And then we're going to talk about dictators of Rome and the Roman military when I see you next time in class, all right? Y'all have a good